Palpatine didn't want to rule the galaxy. He said so himself, out loud to the most powerful people in it. And nobody understood what they were hearing, because it was never about the Empire. It was never about any of it. Everyone who talks about Palpatine makes the same mistake. They call him a megalomaniacal politician who just wanted power. And okay, sure, on the surface that reads. He spent decades moving through the Senate like a shark through calm water, manufactured the Clone Wars from scratch, and declared himself emperor in front of a gallery of applauding senators who had no idea they were voting themselves out of existence. That's the resume. That's what you get from the highlights reel. But that's not the man. And if you stop at the resume, you miss everything. Because what Palpatine actually wanted had nothing to do with ruling a galaxy. The Empire was a tool, the Senate was a prop, the rule of two was a mechanism he fully intended to discard, and Darth Vader, the most terrifying figure in the entire saga, was by Palpatine's own private estimation, something he kept around mostly out of habit. What he was actually after was something the Sith had been reaching toward for 1,000 years, and he believed genuinely and with terrifying clarity that he was the one who would finally get there. So today, we're talking about what Sheev Palpatine was actually doing. All of it. Canon, legends, the sources most fans have never cracked open, because when you line them up, side by side, they tell the same story, and that story is extraordinary. Start with the Empire itself, because here's what most people get wrong. Palpatine never loved it. He built it, used it, defended it when convenient, but he built it the way you build scaffolding. It goes up so you can reach something higher, and once you're there, you tear it down. This is canon from the novel Tarkin. And what Tarkin gives us is Palpatine's governing philosophy, laid out in uncomfortable detail. The core of it isn't ideology. It isn't even competence. It's fear. Moff Tarkin, who understood the Emperor better than almost anyone in the galaxy, frames it plainly. Fear of the station, fear of Imperial might would have provided the necessary deterrent. That's the whole system. You don't need the population to believe in you. You don't need loyalty. You need them afraid of what disobedience costs. Fear as policy, fear as governance, fear as the only thing holding the whole structure together. And here's the thing, a ruler who governs exclusively through fear isn't building something that lasts. He's building something that collapses the moment the source of fear is removed. Palpatine knew that. He was arguably the most politically sophisticated being in galactic history. He knew exactly how fragile this was, and he built it anyway, because he wasn't trying to build something that lasts. And that distinction is everything. He didn't build loyalty, he rented obedience, and the moment the landlord died, everyone stopped paying. Jump forward to Aftermath Empire's End, still canon, and you get the most damning confirmation of this in the entire saga. Before Endor, before his death at Vader's hands, Palpatine, speaking to Gallius Rax about the contingency, said, "If an empire cannot protect its emperor, then the empire must be deemed a failure. It collapses not only because its central figure is gone, but because it must not be allowed to remain." Read that slowly. He's talking about his own empire, his own creation, and he's saying, if I die, it must not be allowed to remain. Not defend the empire at all costs, not continue my legacy. The empire must not be allowed to remain. Palpatine designed his own project to self-destruct. The vehicle was always supposed to be burned once it reached the destination. So if the Empire was always expendable, what was Palpatine actually protecting? To answer that, you have to go back to a night at the galaxy's opera house on Coruscant, where Palpatine pulls a young Anakin Skywalker aside and does something he almost never does. He tells the truth. The opera scene dialogue is canon, it's in the film, but the Revenge of the Sith novelization, which is technically Legends, gives us Palpatine's complete internal experience of that conversation, and it reframes everything. In the film, Palpatine tells Anakin,
"The dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural."
Classic. Sounds like a recruitment pitch. Sounds like manipulation. And it is. But what the novelization shows us is that it's also completely sincere. Because the tragedy of Darth Plagueis isn't just a story Palpatine tells to hook Anakin. It's a confession. Plagueis had actually done it. Genuinely, actually unlocked a comprehension of life and death that no Sith before him had achieved. He understood how the Force creates life, how it sustains it, and theoretically, how to prevent it from ending. And then Sidious killed him in his sleep, because that's the rule of two. That's what the cycle demands. And afterward, Palpatine realized, too late, that what Plagueis knew hadn't been fully transferred, that the most important discovery in Sith history died in a bedroom on Coruscant because of a tradition Sidious himself had followed. The novelization captures his core fear in a single sentence. He could save anyone in the galaxy from death, except himself. That is the wound he carries into that opera house. He controls the galaxy. He has more raw power than any Sith in a millennium, and he is still mortal, still subject to the one thing he cannot legislate, cannot intimidate, cannot scheme his way around. He tells Anakin, all those who gain power are afraid to lose it. He frames it as a lesson about the Jedi, but he's talking about himself. He's afraid, and the only way to never lose power is to never die. And this is where the apprentice problem becomes the defining crisis of everything Palpatine ever did. Because the solution everyone assumes he's working toward, train a successor, pass on the power, preserve the Sith legacy, that's the solution of a man who accepts his own mortality, and Palpatine doesn't accept it. In Legends, specifically in the Book of Sith, Palpatine's personal journal, he's astonishingly candid about Vader. He writes that he had no real reason to have an apprentice except to honor the tradition. Let that sit. He's the most powerful Sith in 1,000 years. He has no genuine need for a second, but the rule of two requires one, so he keeps Vader, not to train a true successor, not because Vader completes him, but because the tradition says he should. His journal also lays out his interpretation of what Bane's rule was actually for. The power of the dark side should be shared only by two, one to embody it, the other to crave it. One to have the power, one to want it. The master doesn't share power with the apprentice. The apprentice's hunger sharpens the master. The relationship is predatory by design, and that means the apprentice never actually gets what they're reaching for, not while the master lives, which also means the master never truly passes the torch, because passing the torch means dying. But Vader was still operating within the cycle. Eventually, he would try to kill Palpatine. That was the rule of two working exactly as designed. And Palpatine's entire project was to exit that cycle, to be the Sith that the cycle could no longer reach. Vader was the most dangerous being alive, and Palpatine kept him around the way you keep a calendar. Useful, but not the point. And everything I've just told you, the Empire, the Apprentice, the Opera House confession, all of it was misdirection. Because while the galaxy was watching Coruscant, the real work was happening somewhere no one knew existed. This is canon from the Rise of Skywalker Visual Dictionary, and the picture it paints is remarkable. The Sith Eternal wasn't a remnant of the Empire scrambling to survive after Endor. They predate the Empire entirely. They were operating completely separately from it, hidden, self-contained, on a world in the unknown regions that had been a Sith stronghold for generations. While Palpatine was playing galactic politics in the Senate, Exegol was the basement where the real work was happening, and the Empire wasn't funding Exegol. The Sith Eternal were using the Empire as cover, as a distraction, a loud galaxy-spanning misdirection, while the actual plan ran quietly underground. And the real work was cloning, not creating an heir, not training a replacement, cloning Palpatine himself. Because the goal was never succession, it was continuity. His original body was failing him, eroded by decades of dark side power he'd channeled beyond any organic limit. So Exegol was a laboratory for achieving industrialized immortality, a place to preserve and refine his essence, generation after generation, until a vessel existed that could actually contain the full power of Darth Sidious without burning out. He wasn't building a successor, he was building a better version of himself. There's a difference, and it tells you everything. The Visual Dictionary confirms the Sith Eternal's mission was exactly this, preserving and perfecting his physical form across generations. This wasn't Plan B after Endor. This was the only plan. The Empire, the First Order, Operation Cinder, the Final Order, all downstream of one ambition: achieve immortality and then reach beyond this galaxy entirely. Because Aftermath Empire's End tells us his ambitions didn't stop at the Outer Rim. He believed this galaxy was only one among many, the unexplored infinity beyond known space. That was his true domain, not emperor over one galaxy, something that had no name yet because no one had ever gotten there. And now the rule of two finally makes complete sense, because in Legends, the Book of Sith presents Palpatine's full interpretation of what Bane actually built. His journal opens, Together, these pages unite. Each author's voice echoes the era in which he held power, but the Sith Order has evolved. The triumphs of my predecessors will be nothing compared to my omnipotence. That is not a man honoring a lineage. That is a man announcing that the lineage was always pointing toward him. Palpatine believed the rule of two was a machine, a 1,000-year compression machine, designed to take all the power of the Sith and concentrate it, cycle after cycle, into a single, final, perfect vessel. Every master and apprentice who fought and died was one more iteration, one more refinement. He wasn't Bane's successor, he was Bane's conclusion. 1,000 years of Sith killing each other, and Palpatine looked at that history and said, yes, that was the plan. I am what that was for. And his journal confirms that's how he saw himself. I realized that I had all the tools I needed to craft my own system of power, one that fused contemporary politics with Sith ideals. He isn't talking about the Senate when he says that. He's talking about the entire arc of Sith history. The galactic political machine was just the most recent instrument in a lineage of instruments stretching back 1,000 years, which is also why, in Legends, he considered Vader expendable, not because Vader was weak, because Vader was still a participant in the cycle, still reachable by it, and Palpatine's entire existence from that night he killed Plagueis forward was oriented around one question: how do I become the Sith the cycle cannot touch? So here's the verdict. Palpatine was not a politician with a god complex. He was a Sith philosopher who weaponized politics. He dismantled the Republic from within, engineered decades of galactic war, constructed an empire he designed to self-destruct, and spent his entire reign secretly funding an immortality project on a hidden world that no one in the galaxy knew existed. Every move, from Naboo to Coruscant to Exegol, was a step in a plan that had nothing to do with power for its own sake. Whether you follow canon or legends, both arrive at the same conclusion. Canon gives us the empire that burns on his command, the Sith Eternal operating independently for generations, the final order that was never a fallback. Legends gives us the journals, the philosophy, the private self-awareness of a man who knew exactly what he was building and why he was building it. Together, they describe one of the most genuinely terrifying characters in fiction, not because he was evil in a simple way, but because he was right about himself in ways that should be impossible. He believed he was the endpoint of 1,000 years of Sith evolution. He believed he had solved the problem Plagueis died trying to solve, and in The Rise of Skywalker, he stands on Exegol and says, "I have died before," not "I tried to avoid death." He says he has already beaten it. The machine worked. How do you even argue with that? Here's what I want to know. If Palpatine was the endpoint of 1,000 years of Sith evolution, the machine working exactly as Bane designed, then what does that make Anakin? Was the Chosen One always supposed to destroy the machine from the inside? Drop that in the comments. The Empire needs to settle this. May the dark side be with you.